Gehört bei Burger und Bier, der Amerika-Podcast aus New York City.
Maybe we could start with you introducing yourself. So tell us who you are and what you do.
Of course. Well, hello. I'm Sabrina Bousbar. I was born and raised in Pinellas County, Florida, but my parents are immigrants. So my dad's from Morocco, my mom's from Colombia. I got really interested in politics back in 2016 when President Trump was elected. And it just was not the country that my parents grew up believing it was and instilling in me and my siblings. And so ever since 2016, I've just been super involved. I started off as an intern at the DNC, the Democratic National Committee. And then after graduating from Florida State University with a degree in political science and international affairs, I went to the Biden campaign. So I've had quite the long journey. I most recently ran for Congress in District 13, Florida, but then also went to the Harris for President campaign after losing the primary and worked in Pennsylvania. And now am taking a little break, but still heavily involved, and will start a new job next week.
Yeah, congratulations on that. And about that, can you tell us about that job that you're going to start?
Yeah, so I'll be working for the ACLU, which is a nonprofit that protects, our civil liberties.
Awesome. So you're
I'm a proud member. I'm a proud ACLU member. It gave me agency. I think it's a great organization. So, yeah, and I'm sure they are doing good work in the community where you are right now. Did you have a specific moment that got you into politics? Was there a moment that made you write this email to the DNC to say, I want to be an intern?
Yeah, so in Florida, and I think there's a few other states that do it, but there's something called Girls State, where a few selected girls from each county go to the Capitol and they do like a mock government. And it's hosted by the American Legion. And so this was junior year of high school. I was trying to figure out what I wanted to really do with my life. I was very involved in the community, like always, organizing and volunteering, more for like the environment. I'm very passionate about environmental science. And so I got chosen for Girls State and I went to Tallahassee. And at first I was just doing it, for the resume so that I can get into colleges. And then I just started going with it, and it's very mock government. So it's like you run for mayor and you run for Senate and you run for governor and all that stuff. And I ended up becoming a senator. And what's really cool about it is you actually get to go to the Capitol and have like 2 days in session. And for me, when I was doing it, I was presenting a bill around marine life. And I sort of had an aha moment that our legislators make decisions on the behalf of the American people on different kinds of subjects. And at that time, I loved all kinds of subjects. So for me, it was sort of like in that moment, I realized I wanted to get into politics because you can make a change. You can push forward initiatives that will make a difference in not just your life, but people's lives. And so from then on, that's when I decided to go the political route.
Mm-hmm. And so, last time we met was the day that you found out that you didn't move on from the primaries in your district. And then, as you said, you moved on to Pennsylvania and worked in the campaign. Pennsylvania obviously being one of the important battleground states, maybe the most important battleground state, and also happens to be the state where Elon Musk was most active. So can you tell us a little bit about what you did there, what your role was, and how you perceived that activity, and did you see it coming, basically, the outcome?
Yeah. So I was the deputy organizing director in Pennsylvania. And just to explain like what that really means is that I oversaw a team of, 35, 36 people. And they are the ones who are your organizers. So they go into the community, they activate volunteers, and they build volunteer leaders, and they have goals to knock doors, to make phone calls, to talk to X amount of people, all that kind of stuff. And I was essentially in charge of making sure that they were reaching the goals we needed them to reach in order to win Pennsylvania. And so I oversaw Pittsburgh, which was Allegheny County. And actually, unfortunately, we were the only county that sort of showed up the same as 2020 did. I think we were like less than 0.5% away from Joe Biden and Trump in 2020 when it came to the, election results, which was not what we saw across not just Pennsylvania, but the entire nation. So when people ask me, like, did you see it coming? Personally, on the grounds, when I was knocking doors, when I was with my team, not really. It felt very close. It felt like this is going to be a very, very close election. And it's going to be like, how many doors or how many extra people do you talk to win? But of course, when I was in headquarters, so I did work with the other deputy organizing directors. And when I would talk to them, some of them felt like me, where they felt as though it was going to be, really, really close. Some felt like it's not going to happen. But we were very positive because we were knocking insane amount of doors in comparison to Elon Musk and like the Republican Party. We had one of the most robust field programs like ever seen in Pennsylvania, and I think like across the nation in a battleground state. So I will say we were a little shocked when he won by a lot more of a margin. Like we were expecting if he were to win, it was going to be very close in Pennsylvania, like a recount close. So it was definitely very shocking when it wasn't a recount or like within the 1%. So for us, I think we were all a little caught off guard. But some people were like, oh, I felt it on the grounds, depending on where they were. My team specifically felt like it was going to be very close, and it was in our county. So for me, I actually thought we had a really good shot because the place that I was overseeing was coming out in the way we thought it would.
And now you're back in the community that you ran in Florida. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Can you explain to us what that community looks like? And one little thing, Bastian, could you mute yourself because the street is really loud? Like just when you're not. Oh, it's picking up like the alarm. Oh yeah, much better. I think probably the recording doesn't have. Yeah, much better if you're not talking. No, it's just in the final recording it will be fine. But yeah. So yeah, could you give us an idea of what your community looks like? What kind of people live there, and what are some of the issues there? Because we were so interested in having you here. Usually we talk about the big picture politics, and now we were excited to have you as like eyes on the ground.
Yeah. So this district is actually primarily old. 70, I want to say like 70% of the population are seniors. And so, that is a pretty big population here. And so a lot of the issues that you come across is, Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security. I will say something that I think I've heard from everyone across all the different demographics, whether it's age or like race or ethnicity or whatever it might be, is insurance. This is the district that has gotten hit by many hurricanes. It's Pinellas County, so Tampa Bay, Florida. And for, just this past hurricane season, we had like the worst back-to-back hurricanes we've seen in like 30 years. And so a lot of what you're hearing is how the price of insurance, home insurance, has gone extremely up. And a lot of people feel like they cannot afford it. They want to leave the state because of it, or are thinking of leaving the state. And so I think a lot of the issues are around, insurance, hurricanes. So sometimes a little bit of environment. We also get the red tide here. So that's like a big problem when our beaches close down, because then tourism closes down. And so our economy's struck. So I will say a lot of the issues we hear here is about the economy, and like also just money, right? Like fiscal issues, is predominantly the things I hear within this community and the issues that we're addressing.
And can you talk about the sentiment a little bit? So it's been a month, a little more than a month of the new administration. What are you hearing? What are people saying where you are?
Yeah, so I've gone to, a few meetings since I've been back, and I think there are like two different things I've seen. The first one I've seen a lot, especially with young people, is defeat, right? Like a lot of people just feel really upset. They don't know what to do, where to put their energy, how to go against this current administration in a positive way. And I think we're starting to grab those people, right? Like today is technically an economic blackout in the USA that every like Democrat or progressive or anyone against the Trump administration is like trying to push out, where we like do not spend money today. And I think that's a way to get people to sort of come out of their cave and realize there are ways you can go against this administration in a sort of positive way too, that helps like small businesses. And then so that's like the first group of people I encounter a lot of the times who just feel like they've lost hope. And then the second group of people, especially when I go, when you go to Democratic meetings, they're more active, right? Like the people who are showing up there want to do something. So with that kind of group, I am seeing a lot of, okay, like, how do we combat this administration? How do we especially combat like misinformation or like the misinterpretations that are coming out of these executive orders or these decisions or the communications that are being produced? And so I've also seen people really feel like, okay, how do we take this negativity and make sure it doesn't impact our 2026 and 2028 elections, and also make sure that like Americans, especially in this district, are receiving the correct information, and not believing, what might not be true coming out of the Trump administration.
And how was that for you personally? Because I mean, I imagine you've been so invested personally, obviously, in running in the primary and then actually even moving. And so even for us as journalists, it's so hard to confront the new government and kind of come up with what is important, what is just show, what is like trickery, what is actually happening on the ground. And even for us, there are days where it's really, really hard to cover all of it and to not get away, not get carried away with even some kind of like secondhand trauma of what is happening or doing too much doom scrolling. So I was really hoping that you can tell us how to manage the stress of it better. Like, how did you snap back into being active?
Yeah, that's a great one. Well, you have to take care of yourself, right? Like, in order to be active and in order to keep fighting the fight, you have to also listen to your body and what your body's telling you. And so, like, for me personally, after the November election, for a whole month, I just went like ghost mode. Like I did not go on TikTok. I did not go on Instagram. Like I tried to read more. I just tried to read books. I went on more walks. I slept a lot because I just, had a crazy 5 years of my life in politics. And I think that really helped me because by the time, and it was a good time frame, right? Like it's the holidays. No one's really working. Like, he wasn't even in office yet, so there's nothing crazy still happening. So that by the time, January came around and he started doing his transition process and announcing all the things, I felt a little bit like, okay, I can breathe again. And I will say there are times where I notice myself doom scrolling and I stop, I'm like, don't do that. Right. And so I think we need to keep our minds fresh and make sure that we're not falling into this big black hole that could that they try to cause, right? I mean, I read the other day that, those first 2 weeks of the administration, they were very intentional of sending out as much things as possible to try and overwhelm us so that we would shut down and so that we wouldn't want to, fight back or, speak up, and they're trying to make people feel like you can't speak against them, right? Like we just saw what they're trying to do with the AP, which is absolutely insane. But, I do think we have to, journalists, public servants, everyone, even civil people, like everyone should be taking to their social media, knocking doors, talking to people, because if we don't have these conversations, we're not going to get anywhere. And that's going to allow the Trump administration to not just do what they did those first 2 weeks, but for like these entire 4 years, continue to put chaos and like dysfunction into our system that we will take more than just another 4 years of a Democrat. Like it would take many, many years to recover from. And I think that's just something we all need to be thinking about, is like the destruction of this administration and how much we're going to have to clean up afterwards.
Do you feel, I just have one question related to this. Do you feel as if you need some kind of like grand theory of the Trump administration that helps you kind of deduct things from that? Or do you feel, no, it's actually the little things that I want to fight and I focus on my ACLU work where it's more like tangible?
I would say like a little bit of both, right? So, my ACLU work will allow me to continue looking at the little things that because we're going to work on protecting civil rights. And, what the Trump administration is doing, there are some things that are technically going against those rights. And so I think in a tangible way, I will be able to really like dive in and help communities organize so that we can fight against, these illegal propositions that are happening. I do think, though, I do sometimes like to focus on the national scale, just because I do come from like a national background, right? Like I've done many presidential electoral races. I worked at the White House. I worked in the federal administration. So I do sort of see the broader picture. And for me, I do want to bring that into conversation, right? Like posting TikToks and Reels and joining podcasts and talking to the radio shows, right? Like making sure that we're having those big theory conversations of how, right now you don't feel the impacts of the Trump administration, but you will in 4 to 6 years. So how are we bracing ourselves and making sure we're doing everything to like limit that kind of impact of, our future?
What would you say? I mean, there's so much noise coming out of this administration. Obviously, that's a hallmark of Trump's, right? He's always talking, and he's always like throwing up all these smoke screens and everything. And it's really hard, and that's probably part of the strategy. It's really hard to focus on one thing. So from your point of view, what are the most important things? Because we get those questions a lot from people, and people are having trouble. And not only people who read the newspapers, but also people who write the newspapers. It's like, what should we be focused on, and not make the mistake to go after every little ball that he throws out, like, a dog running after everything. So what would you think? What are the main areas and the main things that the administration is doing that we should be paying attention to?
I would say the biggest thing is always the misinformation, right? Like just the lies, and how we need to fact check more, right? Like I'm thinking of that, I don't know if y'all saw, but like Macron, and how he like quickly fact checked President Trump in the Oval while they were talking about the funds that were given to Ukraine, and how it wasn't a loan, right? And like, I think we need to start finding ways to where we correct all of that misinformation, which is a lot, right? So I think when it comes to like, what do we really need to focus on? I would say one, Doge. I think that is something that I find the media doing pretty well on, is really focusing on Elon Musk and how he has this department that's not, an actual department, and how he is not a political appointee or an elected official. And he's making all of these, huge funding cuts. And I think we need to be looking at, how that is impacting our international relations with other countries, and the relationships we foster with them are now being deterred because of this, right? Like the dismantle of USAID is something that we need to be really thinking and talking about. I think another thing that we should really be looking at with President Trump and his administration is sort of the whole Gaza-Israel situation, right? I mean, the social media of the White House has been absolutely insane with what they're posting about it. I think we really need to focus on that aspect. And then I would also say immigration, right? Like the White House literally posted an ASMR of illegal immigrants in chains going on a plane. And that is so inhumane. You are dehumanizing a group of people. And I know that we've like fixed it, right? The president of Mexico was like, can we do this more humanely? But I think it's absolutely absurd that, we have an administration who is posting that kind of stuff on their social media platforms, being so upfront about it. So I think when it comes to the media or people just calling out this administration is we need to call out how ridiculously inhumane they are being when it comes to certain policies. And not, the Gulf of Mexico, Gulf of America situation, like that's not something we need to really be like uplifting as much, in my opinion. Like whatever, that impacts no one, right? Like it just impacts the maps, and we all know that legally he can't change that name because it's like you have to go through the IRC and international groups. But what we could be focusing on is the fact that we have a White House who's so openly posting videos of illegal immigrants in chains, which is absolutely like, not what I would say America should stand for, or any country really in the 21st century, right? So I think, there is definitely a lot of groups that we have to pay attention to, but it would mainly be international relations, DOJ, and immigration. I think those are just like the three consistent things I'm seeing that are concerning me with like the future of our country and its policies, and like also the direction of our political climate.
Let me just say that the Gulf of America thing affects you, obviously, because that's where you live, right? So now your beaches are now on the Gulf of America rather than the Gulf of Mexico. So how does that feel?
I still call it the Gulf of Mexico,
Okay.
Okay. Resist.
Just because you're president. Yeah. I mean,
changes everything.
Just because he sent an executive order. I mean, I don't think people realize like executive orders are impactful, but not like fully impactful, right? Like the next president can come in and retract that executive order. And so I think it's really funny that, Apple Maps has Gulf of Mexico and then in parentheses, Gulf of America. So I'm sort of just like, you know what, call it what you want. I'm going to keep calling it Gulf of Mexico.
Sorry, Christine, quick question, because you mentioned immigration. So you're obviously in the Latino community also down there in Florida. Do you, or what's the sentiment? How do people feel? Because that's the community that's probably affected most by this, I would imagine. So how do people feel about this? What's going on, and how does it feature in everyday life, or does it in any way?
Yeah. So I mean, in this district, I will say there's not a huge like immigration population. It's mainly in South Florida. But just like from what I'm seeing and hearing, I hear a mix of things, right? Like there are some people who are very like, you know what, like he said he was gonna, get rid of all of these illegal immigrants, and he's doing just that. And like, that's what I voted for. And then you see the people who like are actually being impacted by it and are fearful for their lives, right? And, I think one of the biggest sentiments is the DACA recipients, I think a lot of them are in fear, and they have to go through now a process where they have to register with the government so that they're like tracked, I guess you could say. And I think a lot of people feel bad for the children who came here and now are DACA recipients. And if they get sent back to their country, they have no one to go to, right? Like they don't have a family or an establishment in the country they technically originate from. And so I do see like people are sympathizing with the DACA people or the children or the families. I think there was a lot in the community, especially when that unfortunate like 11-year-old, committed suicide in Texas. Like I did hear a lot after that happened of how, this is now going into our schools. Children are starting to bully children because they're immigrants. And so I did see people like wake up a little bit with how, the rhetoric of an administration, of a president can impact, the schools and our livelihoods. But we've always known that. And so I think, I'm seeing a little bit of mixed signals when it comes to the immigration community. I also saw like Venezuelans, for example, all of these criminals, as you might want to say, or people who have some kind of background were being arrested, and people were like, see, that's what I wanted. But then when you see the just, other family members being sent back through ICE, people are like, oh, wait, but that's like a good person. Why can't they stay here? So I think it's like sort of a mixed situation in the community, right? Like, especially in Florida, Latinos did turn out and vote for Trump. And so I think some regret it. And then I think some are for it. So it just like really depends on who you're talking to and like which kind of Latino you're talking to, right? Like if you're talking to a Venezuelan or a Cuban, it's going to be more conservative. If you're talking to a Colombian or a Dominican, it might be more moderate. So it just really depends on who you're talking to and where they're from when it comes to immigration and how the Trump administration is doing.
Besides immigration, can you give us an idea of what are some tangible differences that people start to feel compared to now 6 weeks, 7, 8 weeks ago? Yeah,
the eggs. I feel like the eggs has been like the most tangible thing that people are talking about. So, when President Biden was in office, people were complaining about groceries. People were complaining that gas is expensive. I think a lot of what Americans have been saying and that the Democrats should have done better on is the economy, right? Like, I can't pay my bills, help me. Like, that's what you're supposed to do, government. And so I think the most tangible difference we've seen since President Trump has taken office is our groceries have gone higher. And so, eggs now cost over $10 and it's really crazy. And the gas is still sort of the same. I haven't really seen a big difference. And so I think when it comes to like tangible items that people are seeing differences in is that, they thought President Biden was bad for the economy, but honestly, it looks like President Trump is also not doing great for the economy. And so I think that's been like the biggest difference. And I think immigration is also the biggest difference too, right? Like President Biden, ICE doesn't go anywhere, which people don't think about, but like, illegal immigrants are being deported year round. And so I think, President Biden, on the other hand, tried to like limit it, tried to do it in a more human way, didn't try to post about it on social media or the press. While President Trump, like his tangible thing is posting it, showing it, talking about it. So I think those are the differences really that I'm seeing that people are paying attention to and can actually see happening in their real lives.
And is there a difference in your own community, in your own circles, in terms of how much people care about politics right now? Because mostly when I talk to the like low-key information friends of mine who are not in journalism or at the UN, they say, well, I can't stand it right now. I'm not watching anything. And they are kind of like tuning out. And I also recognize, of course, this is a privileged thing that some like affluent New Yorkers can probably do. What is your impression of like the people around you? Do you feel as if there's more people who completely want to turn off, or has it been the same? Is it probably even more because people want to fight it? What are some impressions there?
I think around me specifically, people want to fight it, right? Like I noticed a lot of people were like, oh, we didn't win, and that's a problem. And what can we do now to win? And I think in the state of Florida, it's been a lot more it's been difficult, right? Because now the Republicans they just keep beating us over and over and over. And so I've noticed people are like, we need to do a full reset and we need to find a way to actually win in the state of Florida. And so I've seen people turn on a little bit more. I will say, like, right after the election, everyone turned off. Like, I do think, for a month, everyone did take a big breather, but starting January, I noticed a lot more people were going to meetings. People were starting to have conversations. They're already talking about, what elections can we win in 2026 so that we can turn the House back to blue, so that we can have more checks and balances against the Trump administration. And so I do think like a lot of people who are involved want to be more involved. I think when I'm just thinking of like my friends who aren't politically involved, I actually think they're starting to lean in more. I've seen them, I've seen people that never really talk about politics post saying this is absolutely insane that the Trump administration is doing XYZ. Especially when they posted that Trump Gaza AI image video. I saw that everywhere, right? Like I saw people who never ever talk about any kind of issue be like, whoa, 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 what the hell is going on here? And so I do think like people, especially young people that I've never saw activate or advocate for Democratic or Republican policies are now starting to post a little bit more. So I do see like, it's like 2016, but maybe a little bit bigger, where people are waking up, in my opinion, and they're like, oh, we really do have a problem in this country. Like half of America does believe President Trump and like President Trump's, policies and issues, and it's getting worse and worse every day, right? And so I have seen a little shift, I think, more on the positive side rather than the shutting off side.
And you obviously have, close connections to many parts of the Democratic Party. And a lot of people have been asking, where are the Democrats, right? Like, so where is the resistance? Where are the people that are speaking up, that are doing something to counter this? And can you talk a little bit about what's going on inside the party, and like what are the things that people are talking about, and also the strategies that people are coming up with to go up against what's going on in the administration?
Yeah. So, I mean, as I mentioned, people are talking about resetting, right? So like when you reset, you need time to really get back into the community. And we just elected our DNC chair too. So, the DNC chair, now that he's there, he needs to build out his team. So the DNC is starting to hire again. They're starting to build out their teams. And once we see that coming into fruition, I believe by summer, we'll start having more coming out from the DNC and the Democratic Party. On the local aspect, the Democrats are meeting. I will say people who never showed up to Democratic meetings are now showing up to Democratic meetings. So I know we're building membership, and we're building people who are really upset and don't know what to do, and we're bringing them into the picture. I think when it comes to our reset and our plans, it's all about messaging a lot of the times. What did we do wrong on communicating to American people? And what did the Republicans do right? And how do we counter that, right? Because I think something that the Republicans do really well at is, executing a message, and it's sticking with people. And I think Democrats are really good at executing messages, but it doesn't stick with people. And so we need to find the ways to stick it and make sure people retain what a Democratic Party is and what the Democratic values are. And also, how are we messaging to all voters and all Americans rather than just specific, groups that we know we can win with. So I think, a lot of us are having these conversations. Another thing we're having conversations on is just money, and just how do we actually spend our money right? And what's unfortunate, I think, is the whole money situation, right? With Elon Musk, he gave millions and millions and millions of dollars to Donald Trump. And of course, people do that same to the Democratic Party, but not in the same extent as he did when it came investing into battleground states. And so I think that's another big conversation is how do you combat, when that kind of scenario happens? And so I tell people the best way to get involved is to look up, your Democratic Party. There's one in every county in the nation, right? Any state you're in, you can find your Democratic Party and get involved. But there's also nonprofits, right? Like the ACLU, Reproductive Freedom for All. I mean, there are nonprofits out there who have been at the forefront since this Trump administration, fighting the misinformation. Voto Latino has been so great about combating the misinformation for immigration specifically, and also just any other Trump administration things coming out. And so I think, when people want to get involved, I tell them look at the nonprofits and how they're focusing on these really, certain specific issues, and make sure you start helping them out, right? A lot of the times you can do volunteering for them. You should be calling your representatives, your senators, all of those kinds of things. And so I think really it's not only should I be posting on my social media, but I should also take that extra step and get involved with Democrats or nonprofits.
Yeah. So you mentioned messaging. From your point of view, what is the message? What is the winning message that the Democratic Party has to put out and has to get to voters, you know, to make a shift in the 2026 elections to get that done. What do you think? What should they do?
Well, I'm still figuring it out. I mean, I think about this like every day, right? Like what is our winning message? And I go back and forth on what it could be, right? I mean, you know, I always thought the threat of democracy was super important, right? Like how the Trump administration is the threat to democracy, and it clearly wasn't. It was the economy. And so, but the problem is, and the reason I combat this with myself every day when it comes to what is the winning message is that it might be the economy now, but in 2 years from now, it might be something completely different, like, you know, natural disasters, right? Like it could just shift. And I think that's the interesting part of our climate is that like our political climate is derived on not just journalism, but like social media now, like TikTok and Instagram and all those reels and the algorithms and things that just feed you information that we can really shift perception. And so I think when it comes to Democrats being more successful is we have to be ready to react to anything, and we have to be more proactive, right? Like, what are the things we can see coming that Americans are going to feel, right? Like what prices are going to go up, what, you know, scenarios are going to impact their livelihoods, and how do we tell them that, you know, we are the party that wants their life to be better? I think that's like really what it is like we as Democrats want to make sure if you know, fall and hurt your arm, you can go to the doctor without fearing the bill. You know, we as Democrats want to make sure that if you want to go to Harvard University, you can get the education in middle school and high school and still make it to an Ivy League. Like we are the party that wants to make sure you can put food at the table or afford to buy your first house for your family. And so I think, you know, we really have to focus on that. We are the party that wants what's best for you, and not like just focusing on the 1% or the wealthy or, you know, the people who are the most influential. We want to focus on the everyday American who just wants a better life. And so, you know, I do think we have to find ways to advocate for that more. And I do think Democrats need to be a little more spicier and be willing to just say how they feel and say what they want to say. Because I do think like we have lost also our authenticity a little bit. I think that's what President Trump just does so well in, is that he's just himself and himself only, and people like gravitate towards that. And so I think that's something we also need to be pushing. Not that Vice President Harris wasn't that. I think she did so well being herself. But I do think like, you know, overall, when it comes to all the people who are running for office or all the people who are involved, just bringing back like the authenticity of, you know, we want to help your life be better. And that's literally all we're trying to do.
Who's a politician that inspires you right now? And you're not allowed to say AOC or Bernie. No. I would honestly say right now, I love Representative Jasmine Crockett. I think she's been doing so well. I mean, back to my whole like spiciness, right? Just the other day, they were like, if you could talk to Elon Musk, what would you say to him right now? And she said, fuck off. And I was just like, that's exactly the kind of like sass we need right now. Just like the snappiness, the ability to just be so truthful. Because it's true, right? Like I tell everyone my problem with Doge and Elon Musk is technically that's Congress's job, right? Like Congress's job is to pass the budget, is to provide oversight to the budget and make sure that our spending is helping Americans. And Elon is just swooping in and trying to do everything, right? And so I think she's just been phenomenal in the messaging against Doge, but also just like really, sticking it to the man. Yeah, and her standing there, and it didn't stop with that little sentence, because there on these steps, then she had this like whole minute where she had this amazing sentence of God did not put me here with a sense of fear or something like this, and I thought like 2 minutes of like great rhetoric, and it's like it's a really like she has a very engaging way of speaking. It's true.
Yes.
I have one last question, and then probably you, Bastian. So what you're saying reminded me of a book I was reading called Politics is for Power. basically arguing, well, we're all hobbyists in politics, especially like us journalists or people in a city like DC or us in New York. And it really is our goal to move beyond the hobbyism and take actually action. And what you were saying reminded me of this idea of, for us, it's so easy to get frustrated because we have to focus on politics on like a 10,000 feet level the whole time. But when I hear you, I get a sense of that you are still willing to fight and getting into action. Would you say that this is a correct perception of where you are right now, that you're saying, well, I'm not willing to accept that the other side has already won. I'm not willing to accept that there are these evil geniuses who basically rig the game beyond repair.
So, yeah, I mean, I do believe that they are evil geniuses who have rigged the game, but I don't believe like to the extent of like forever, right? Like I do think, if I'm a firm believer of the whole, like, if there is a will, there is a way, right? Like, if you do put your mind to it and you try and find every way possible, eventually you will win, you will succeed. You might have to fail multiple times to get there. And I loved Vice President Harris's concession speech when she said that, right? Like her whole slogan is, when we fight, we win. And she said that sometimes the fight takes longer to eventually win. I think that's exactly the message that we all needed to hear, the message that young people needed to hear. And so for me, that is exactly how I feel, is like, I took care of my mental health. I like rested up and I was like, okay, now you got to like, scrub off the dust and get back up. And so I do believe that, the fight is necessary. You can't just give up, right? Like what is life if you just give up? If you just allow this extremism to continue to flood into your communities, I want to be a part of the resistance. I think about, when I have grandkids, are they going to look at me and be like, what did you do during this crazy time in your country's history? I don't want to say, oh, I was just, I took a seat and did nothing. I want to say, no, I worked and got involved. I ran for office. I continued the work. I worked for ACLU to help, protect our civil liberties and rights, and, show them that, we were on the right side of our history. And so I think, to your point, it's definitely in the extent of like, you got to get back and fight. Even though they've rigged the game, there is a way for us to also fight back and rig the game ourselves, right? And it's figuring out, like I said, how do we play against, what they have been doing to the media, what they've been doing with funding, what they've been doing with our elections from the local to federal level.
I have one last question because I know you have to go. You mentioned the ACLU and you mentioned the resistance. Can you talk to us just a little bit about what you're going to be doing for them? What's your job going to be, and how are you personally fighting back?
Yeah, so it is a new role. I will be one of their national organizing strategists. And essentially, what I will be doing is helping build like organizing programs throughout the nation. I'll have, I think they're going to divide it up. There's like about 5 of us, but we're going to divide it up and we're going to be in charge of a few states. And it's going to be our jobs to really build organizing. So the people who are looking to do something, who are really upset with the current state of our politics and economy and all of that, will find a way to make sure they come into the organization and are able to activate and advocate. And so it's sort of going to be a role where I'm, we're building the plane while also flying it at the same time, because it's never existed. But I'm very excited about it because, to your point about what I'm going to be doing, is really making sure we are getting people to get involved. We are making sure that people have an outlet to go to, and that we're able to show the administration that, you can come for our rights, but we're always going to defend them no matter what.